to the Crypto, Bitcoin, Ethereum Private Decentralized Infrastructure Show. 3 weeks in a row. I'm Chair. I am here to prop you up. I am joined, as always, with my partner in crime, and I do mean crime. The published author, my friend, Sterlin. Hello, sir.
Thank you, my friend. So I'm getting some music in the background. Is that something from my computer?
No, that's me.
Okay.
I'm fading it out. I'm fading. I just don't want us to come. I don't want to enter into the show without a bed of nice generated jazz.
I thought it might have been. I do like actually, I love the music, so it's really good. Great.
This syncopated beats, you know?
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. Of course, you're always going to have me because this is our show together. Really glad to be here, though, brother. I think we're going to have a really fantastic conversation. Hopefully, it's informative for folks who are watching.
I hope that it will be, and let us know in the chat if it is, if it isn't, and any specific call-outs, questions, or feedback. I do invite you to use the chat. We're streaming live all over the place, across my accounts, Sterlin's accounts. So wherever you might have found us, be sure that we are looking at the chat and we will respond one way or another. I do look forward to these talks, specifically, Sterlin, because we seem to go rather deep. We both have been paying attention to the wider crypto ecosystem for a number of years. I think if you have been active even longer than I have, and it's coming up on a decade for me. And we have a particularly, I don't want to say slanted, but we have our own take on things and what's happening geopolitically, let alone cryptographic technologically. Yeah, as a word. So excited to get into it. We were mentioning, or we touched on briefly in a Twitter space that we just did on the Logos account, touching on the difference between what Logos is building in terms of a movement and a technology stack, and what the ultimate aim and goals and objectives are for that, and how that compares to the network state movement that has gained popularity over the last 3 years or so, led by Balaji Saravanasian. Pardon my Armenian. But Balaji, as he's best known, who wrote the book The Network State and sort of defines his vision for what network states can become, what they should become, with the type of recognition that they can or should seek. And so comparing between sort of the Logos philosophy and objectives, the movement that's very much rooted in Farewell to Westphalia, the book written by Logos co-founder Jared Hope and Peter Ludlow of the Ludlow Institute, and how that compares to the network state, Balaji's book, The Network State, and Balaji's vision, the Praxis vision, even. So how do you approach the two, Sterlin, one compared to the other? How do you frame each of those movements, let's call them? I think you're muted.
Yeah, my bad.
There you are.
I was muted below. Okay, cool. Yes, I'm going to get into that. I think this is going to be a really important discussion. There's a lot of people who I think really need to see this discussion and to internalize and process these ideas, because it's really important. I think history and understanding where we came from and how movements formed is really critical to understanding the nature of the time that we live in, and also for helping us realize what is real versus what is fake, what is true versus what is like a simulacrum, right? I want to start though here. You're right. We have both been in this space a long time. You almost a decade, me just at a decade, a little bit over, and we've seen a lot. And this fits perfectly into this discussion because arguably the network state movement, quote unquote, parallel society movement, quote unquote, it was directly produced by crypto people, by people interested in blockchain, but it goes actually deeper than that. And this is where I'm going to get into the history. So let's get to the controversial bit out of the gate. There are a couple of different movements in the context of this parallel society network state movement. Most people know it by the term that Balaji Srinivasan, and my pronunciation is also going to be butchery of his name. But most people know the network state movement by Balaji because he is the alleged guru of the space, the creator, the one who innovated around the ideas. This is the assumption that people live by. And I'm going to be the first to tell you that that is an erroneous assumption. Balaji, and I want to be kind here in a sense. There have been some good things that Balaji has said and done, but there's also been some not so good things that we're going to talk about and I'm going to point out today. But the first thing that I want to point out is that Balaji is not the original person to talk about these ideas. He wasn't the first person to even write about them, and he won't be the last. And he certainly is not the overseer or the progenitor of the values and the ideas that sculpt and shape the parallel society movement. All right.
Who was the first?
Yes. So the idea has quite a long lineage and a long history, but the first person in my awareness with my research, and I've delved deeply into this. I've written articles for Logos about this. The first person to write about it historically is Timothy May, specifically. So he wrote a piece back in, I think, 1992 called Libertaria in Cyberspace. Libertaria in Cyberspace. A bit of a history lesson or some background on Timothy May. Timothy May is the OG crypto-anarchist. He is the guy also credited with the invention of the philosophy crypto-anarchism, right? The one who initiated it. And by the way, this is just a random, also historical fact if anybody's interested. Timothy May was specifically influenced by people like Murray Rothbard, right, who originally wrote about anarcho-capitalism, as the creator of anarcho-capitalism. He was also a fan, I know this is controversial, he was also a fan and heavily inspired by Ayn Rand, especially the Fountainhead, right? So the roots of the parallel society movement, historically speaking, are very much embedded in the libertarian ethos, anarcho-capitalist philosophy, etc. Now, in this, and by the way, I want to make a claim that's an aside. This isn't to say that you have to embrace these particular values or these philosophers specifically to embrace the values that color our current trajectory in the parallel society movement. That, this is something that I can personally speak to. I'm not an ideological purist, and I think ideological purism is a way to excise individual thought, right? And is ultimately not a great thing for having an innovative mindset. That's kind of another discussion. I just wanted to add that as an aside. So Timothy May invented the philosophy of crypto-anarchism, and he also was one of the first people to talk about the ideas of parallel societies. Now, in this article, Libertarian Cyberspace, his claim is that this is going to exist purely digitally, and that the idea is that uh, encrypted hackers or hacker personalities will come together under the aegis of this darkened web that is a community, and that they can enact different kinds of coordination protocols together here. They can help each other stay protected. They're leveraging strong cryptography, privacy safeguards, etc. And it kind of becomes a community that has its own power, that has its own force multipliers for creating change in the world. And this is effectively a community that grows large enough that it can compete with sort of the overarching power centers in society, which are the corporations, nation states, etc. And again, May was just a diehard crypto anarchist. He wanted to create these tools and these technologies to push back against repressive regimes, against the violence and the coercion of the nation state, and this was his goal. And since then, other people have written about it and talked about it, even before Balaji, right? One of the most well-known examples, and I think this is a book that a lot of people in our space quote, it's The Sovereign Individual, right? The Sovereign Individual is like a prophetic book. They wrote about these political formations that would emerge, although they did not also cite Timothy May, to my knowledge, in the book. It is a part of this historical lineage. Also, Jerry Everhard wrote a book called Virtual States. He was a researcher in cryptography. I don't know if you would call him a crypto-anarchist, but this is the historical lineage. And I wrote about this, by the way. If anybody wants to go to the crypto-anarchist entry on Wikipedia, I'm the one who actually added the bit about network states in the Wikipedia entry and added the truth of the history of where this movement is derived from.
You need to sew on the Wikipedia contributor merit badge. You earned it.
Somebody needed to add that fucking truth to it, right? I mean, we couldn't let it stand.
I like how you frame it. I think it's the best distillation that I've heard recently. Like communities coordinating together via encrypted technology to compete with corporations and nation states.
Yes,
there it is. There it is. One sentence with one comma in the middle, beautifully constructed. And there it is right there. And that's the promise of once the Byzantine generals problem was solved and Byzantine fault tolerance was achieved and Bitcoin was launched, and then Ethereum, the purported world computer and database that was supposed to feature private storage and messaging but doesn't anymore. That was the promise, is for communities and people to be able to coordinate in a meaningful way across encrypted technology, even when they have diverging incentives. When there is one incentive that they're aligned on, they can coordinate on it. That is the promise of this stuff. That is why we are all here. It's not about number go up, although that's nice. It's about the possibility of that for the human governance systems that have basically been in place, and this is laid out in Farewell to Westphalia by Jared Hope and Peter Ludlow. Those governance systems are damn near 400 years old, if not 400 years old at this point, and that our lives are directly influenced, impacted, and boxed in based on the model of the nation state and the very, more often than not, the choice you were never allowed to make of what country and government you were born into, but are beholden to each and every law and custom which they uphold. That is a 400-year-old idea and emerged from even more archaic ideas. And, well, things are cyclical. Time is a circle. All of that. How much lost knowledge and lost history do we have? We don't even know. We can't even begin to know. But even within all of that, there is the possibility for progression now because of those encrypted technologies. And that the power, for me, the inspiring part of Bitcoin, of Ethereum, is that people can coordinate it in potentially a less corrupt way. Now, what has emerged even today is that a DAO was quote unquote attacked for $20 million. I'm going to pull up the name of the DAO because it escapes me in this very moment. There was a proposal that was made via the DAO governance that is defined by a large token holder. Now, how they came across those tokens, whatever, but they became a very large token holder in said DAO and were able to create a proposal. Bonk. Okay, Bonk. This is not a shill for Bonk. The Bonk DAO, somebody proposed that $20 million worth of Bonk be sent to their address. They did so via a governance proposal, the approved governance method of the Bonk DAO, and nobody bothered to look uh, at the vote. The vote was open for whatever the standard window is for their DAO, and the person who held all that Bonk voted for themselves. Nobody else voted, and it was executed automatically, autonomously, even via the well, the rails and mechanism that are defined. Now, why do I bring this up? Like, certainly these systems are less than perfect and can certainly be just as manipulated or even more manipulated. Now, I get there's an argument in itself whether is this corruption? Is this a lone actor, or let's say a group of actors acting under one alias to manipulate a system? Certainly, probably, maybe. But it's very interesting. No, you know what? I actually, I forget why I brought it up. Other than this is a very new thing that broke just a few hours ago. Here's the point. Less corrupt is corrupt system. So that is either an example of corruption or manipulation or coercion. Maybe not coercion, but certainly manipulation, to be sure. But the promise of all of this and what inspires me and brings me back to the table every day is the possibility for less corrupt systems and for humans to be able to coordinate within them, because corruption is perhaps the most insidious, evil, and energy draining thing that exists in the world. And we live in a world rife with corruption. The solution for that might lie in crypto, and that's what keeps me inspired. But now I'm just talking in circles. Help bring me back to the center, Sterlin.
Yeah, no, I think we're constantly going to come back. I think this is going to be a good theme of our show, that constantly coming back to the villainy of corruption and crypto or crypto adjacent tools, technologies as the solution. And I think one of the things that we're constantly trying to do is revivify this original intent of crypto, which is to disintermediate third parties, give financial responsibility back to the individual, keep the cypherpunk and the crypto-anarchist agenda alive. And this is also, of course, why we were discussing, and it went this way because we were talking about Balaji, the networks, the historical origins of parallel societies. I wanted to bring it back to that, and we are going to traverse this, though. We'll come back to this because there's some important points that you made that play into this. But I do think it's critical that people who are paying attention to the space and all of its different outputs, right, especially with this novel parallel society movement, understand that there are efforts underway by certain actors to push this, and this is where the threads tie together, trying to push this ecosystem into a direction that is antithetical to its core roots, right? And that's key. So there's different attempts at hijacking, at trying to apply more traditional structures to these decentralized structures that we're trying to build and are indeed building. And this is my personal critique, frankly, of Balaji's vision of the network state. It is a bastardization of the original intent as articulated by Timothy May, where it was based on cypherpunk ideas, based on privacy, based on the encrypted tech, based on good governance. So philosophy was at the core of this idea originally. But what happens is folks come in and they have a tendency to want to hijack it and push it into different directions, or it's framed in the light of their own value sets, which may or may not be aligned with the things that we think are good associated with the space. So let me define how Balaji sees this idea. There are some pieces of it that do align, but one of the first things is these network states for him. These are communities that first exist digitally in the cloud, right? Like all of us who have communities or cultures embedded in crypto. Those cultures come together, right? Those communities come together, they create culture, and then at some point they might want to beam themselves down to the land and create a physical local community. This is what he calls a network state, at least one part of it, right? And then this broad community that exists in the cloud can have multiple physical locations associated with it, and this is what he calls a network archipelago, right? But nowhere in his work, and you can read his book, I think you can get it for free at the Network State, and this is not a purposeful advertisement for his book, but I do think it's worth reading. So you can see that no credit is given to the cypherpunk contingent, no credit is given to crypto-anarchists, and Balaji has said it himself publicly that he does not agree with anarchists. So this, in my opinion, is a attempted hijacking of the idea. The scholarship is weak, and the discourse is also weak, and it has usurped a lot of the foundational ideas and transformed them into this more technocratic vision, in my opinion. And why this vision looks to be more technocratic, because Balaji has a mindset is not only that. So instead of like competing with the nation state, he believes that these network states should play at the big boys table, right? Should get a seat at the king's table. Effectively, this means getting diplomatic recognition from the United Nations, being part of the global context, and also he really, I always joke around saying that he just loves Kuan Yew. He has his poster in his little room, right? And Lee Kuan Yew, for you guys who don't know, is the founder and basically the creator of Singapore and the Singaporean model. I think Singapore is like a Faberge egg. It looks all beautiful and nice on the outside. It has a fairly good quote unquote economics, but it's really like a vicious anti-humanitarian place. And its underbelly, this is a place where if you get arrested, they give you, like, if you get arrested for drugs at a certain amount, they'll just kill you. And if it's a lower amount, they may even give you paddles in prison, right? They actually will spank you, which just seems fucking weird, first of all.
Yeah, I invite people to watch the NoFX documentary that they did when they toured in Singapore specifically, and were able to, even with Singapore's rigid anti-drug laws, were able to get their hands on some drugs and documented it, of all things, and released it to the public. So they're probably never going back. But I am probably the foremost critic of Singapore. I'm the most critical person of Singapore that I know, and I'm so glad that you're bringing it up. Because for all of the promises of its beauty, and by the way, like, well, I don't want to weave too hard, so I'll just say that, yeah, I'm always very skeptical that, like, a utopia enforced by a government that the people have very little influence on, if at all, I'm very skeptical of. And even though Singapore occupies a very small area of land, it seems to have an outsized amount of influence for some reason. And maybe we can get into it, but yeah, I'm highly skeptical of Singapore, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, so the guy Lee Kuan Yew, basically he lifted all of his ideas for how the Singaporean model would work from the Chinese, right? There's a lot of history there, and I'm not at liberty to, I mean, I am at liberty to talk about it all, but I don't have all the deep, broad knowledge of his interactions with the Chinese president at the time. But I do know that the ideas that he built Singapore around are similar to the ideas that were leveraged to develop Shenzhen, right? Shenzhen is a special economic zone, has a certain kind of model. That's all part of this puzzle. But so there, anyway, needless to say, the point is that the original cypherpunk intention, and having this as a place for people to be able to protect themselves, to have an understanding that there are systems that are predatory, that didn't really cross his imaginary ethos, right? It's not something that he considered in trying to develop network school. Instead, it's more of this hub where he can develop out these sort of technocratic ideas, and then have it position itself so that it has a large enough population to have a seat at the global stage. Now, I think what makes this more terrifying is that, and this is going to be some more speculation and some opinion, so I want to provide that as an aside, right? Or as a disclaimer. I think that he is interested in things like genetic testing, like getting people's DNA, those kind of works. He's funded companies related to this. He's also very much interested in developing in accordance with like a praxis. You guys know Dryden, sort of the praxis vision. There's like an almost like an ethnocentrism, like a nationalism. It's a lot of these communities share this notion that the West is dead or dying, and I actually, in some ways, share that notion as well. But in their mind, there needs to be some kind of rebirth. This is more of like the Praxian Dryden vision, or there needs to be a replacement where this is more of the uh, Balajian vision, right, with the Singapore and the Asian cultural model. And all of these models have some form of here's the thing, this is going to cut we're going to cut this very closely and tie off all the loose ends with people like Curtis Yarvin. So a lot of these folks, Balaji included, are very interested in Yarvin-esque ideas like a neo-reactionary neo-monarchism, where there should be this technological authoritarian or technological monarch who oversees these communities. And this vision, these visions also largely stem from people like Peter Thiel, who wrote about the idea that democracies have failed, and they embraced libertarianism at one point, but basically they have become disillusioned in libertarianism as a way to like provide freedom. So this boggles the imagination, but their solution to that, to the fact that they don't think libertarianism can work, is to have a technocrat king, like Plato's philosopher king, rule over these communities and give them freedom, right? I feel like we've heard this before. And there's always somebody who gets into these positions, either of monetary wealth or corporate power or technological hard power, where they feel like they know what's best for everybody else. This is a tale as old as time, and that they can inject their ideas into civilization, and then they can course correct that community and help save civilization. It's kind of a messianic complex, right, or a savior complex that ultimately ends up just enslaving people along the path. And I'm not saying this is like a forward facing marketing statement that any of these folks are actually using. I'm just saying that this is the natural consequences or outcomes of playing this kind of game. So, but I hope I was able to explain why, like, where Balaji's vision kind of stems from. His is more like this Thiel based technocratic kind of vision, versus where Logos stands, where some of these regenerative communities stands, where we're trying to work in a more decentralized fashion, where we're trying to build from the bottom up, where we're trying to incorporate the people, not be neo-colonialist, and leverage technology that actually preserves privacy, that preserves human autonomy and liberty and human sovereignty, and that actually opens up the future for collective betterment, right? Holistic well-being, more personal liberty, collective liberty, et cetera, and all the rest of it, right?
Yeah, and it's important to understand origins to understand like where things are going, or and the origin. Like I want to go back to so many of the points that you just made, but like in understand the origins of Logos, like what is Logos doing and why is it different from Bitcoin, Ethereum, Monero, Zcash, Solana, etc. And like what are the significant or important points that makes it different? Um, Specifically, it's that like things have gotten close. Let's put like through first with Bitcoin, peer-to-peer digital cash, a way for people to coordinate completely, let's say more or less permissionlessly. And then Ethereum builds on top of that the um, sort of the coordination ability when you add a world computer and world database element with the consensus. Now you can really do some things, but unfortunately, and I cover it ad nauseum, and I will continue to. Ethereum failed when Ethereum was first defined. The beauty of it, the inspirational part of it, probably the reason that inspired more people to like the types of minds. Like Ethereum held probably like some like the top level developer mind share right up until AI hit. You know, like all of the young cool devs or the hip old devs we're all shipping on Ethereum until like Solana came out, and or I would say most of them continue to ship on Ethereum, but then there were like opportunities elsewhere. That's not that all that's like beside the point. Um, things got really, really close, but Ethereum dropped the ball because Web3 was the 3 elements of Web3 are like proof of stake consensus instead of proof of work, and then decentralized peer-to-peer private storage and messaging. But those last 2 parts, Ethereum, the Ethereum Foundation, the Ethereum core devs, the powers that core devs, the core devs, and the powers that be, namely Vitalik and his buddies, stop supporting the messaging and storage part of it. So there are no unstoppable apps. Every Ethereum app, unless you are running your own node and broadcasting your transactions and querying your data via that node, there is no unstoppable application on Ethereum. You are using RPCs for your data, for broadcasting your transactions, for signing things. You're using a likely browser extension based wallet that is collecting all of your data, fingerprinting you, marking you, tracking you, in some cases censoring you, etc. You are being sandwich attacked by, MEV operators, etc. So 7 different gateways potentially, at least 5, but up to 7 different censorship points that exist every time you interact with Ethereum. The reason being that the private decentralized peer-to-peer storage wasn't shipped, private decentralized peer-to-peer messaging and data transfer wasn't shipped, but things got a lot closer. Things moved really, really far very, very quickly when Bitcoin got shipped. And then I would argue even like the same type of parabolic jump again when Ethereum shipped, and then that potential was kneecapped. And Ethereum became the DeFi chain, launch your own token chain that everyone knows it as today. And hey, like the biggest layer 2 is Base, and everyone's thrilled about it for some reason. Go fuck yourselves, for real. Logos is basically shipping the original vision of Ethereum, including proof of stake consensus and private peer-to-peer decentralized storage and messaging that runs 100% in a peer-to-peer fashion across, well, the users that are running their nodes. And that functionality that Ethereum was supposed to have, Logos actually has, with all of the lessons learned from the decade of development or more, and also from chains that came after Ethereum. So like the programs or smart contracts on Logos actually look a lot more like Solana, written in Rust, etc., but are not, not centralized to 100 node runners that have to invest $100,000 a year to maintain that node like it is on Solana. In fact, there is no minimum proof of stake on Logos, and you can run it on a machine as small as a Raspberry Pi, the nodes, I mean. So there's a significant difference. That once unlocked, and like to go all the way back to like communities coordinating via encrypted technology. Well, it's like, yes, on Ethereum, you can coordinate like on encrypted technology potentially, but without those 2 protocols that I keep mentioning and harping on, like there's a limit. There's a limit to what you can do. Then there's a limit to how actually permissionlessly and censorship resistantly you can coordinate. And talk to the Tornado Cash devs about their plights, and look into it, and look into the cases of Roman Storm and I don't want to forget his name, but I'm forgetting it. The Tornado Cash dev based in Europe. It's worth looking into their cases. Roman Storm's case goes on. In fact, the Department of Justice in the United States is still pursuing a retrial because he split the jury on his last trial. Can you imagine? Anarchy, Sterlin mentions crypto-anarchy and the roots of crypto-anarchism, and anarchy is a loaded word to some, and like the definition of anarchy means without rulers, meaning groups of people can coordinate in a can coordinate it via these tools we're describing without rulers. It's really that simple, and anybody that tries to overcomplicate it might be seeking to confuse or manipulate you. Singapore. Yeah, we'll get back to that. Curtis Yarvin is a son of American diplomats, European-based American diplomats. Curtis Yarvin was raised in private schools, mostly abroad, raised by American diplomats. Now, if you've read Edward Snowden's book, Permanent Record, he goes deeply into the role that diplomats serve within the greater function of the United States hegemony. Basically, 100% of them are three-letter agency agents. So if you're a diplomat who lives at an American embassy in Europe, you are 99.99% an agent. So Curtis Yarvin, son of international agents, is pushing the technocratic idea of a god king presiding over a certain territory and making the decisions for them. But this is not his original idea. In fact, if we trace back the origins of the technocratic idea, it goes all the way back to none other than Elon Musk's great grandfather. In the turn of the 20th century, these were the points being proselytized, I can't pronounce anything today, by Elon Musk's grandfather. And the idea of a North American technate that extends from the northern points of South America all the way up to Greenland, encompassing all of the physical landmass between there, originates from Elon Musk's pinche grandfather, great-grandfather rather, not Curtis Yarvin. In fact, they are just re-espousing and regurgitating this vision of a technocracy and technate type government that started long ago. And isn't it interesting that starting from the great-grandfather of Prince Musk all the way up until now, that this momentum continues. So, and oh, by the way, also people that are interested in eugenics and gene studying and so like similar to our friend Balaji. But also Curtis Yarvin's brother. Look into Curtis Yarvin's brother. How about that? And what he was the main suspect of when he was a student at Yale. Huh? Just a Curtis Yarvin brother Yale. See what comes up. Huh? Yeah, that was a lot. Which direction do you want to go?
No, I was loving it, man. I am more than happy to let you rant. It's so good, so good. Yeah, well, I think I'll start with the first part. You were talking about Logos and the Logos technology stack in comparison to Ethereum, the Ethereum stack and community, and the differences there, which I think are important and play back into this cypherpunk piece. I'll be the first to say that there are, I think, a lot of authentically good people in the Ethereum community who do want to see the protocol maintain the cypherpunk origins. Even Vitalik has been talking about this a lot more, and even in the statements by the Ethereum Foundation, in statements by Vitalik, there is almost a renewed push for more privacy-based tech, a renewed push for the crypto-anarchist agenda. There's the whole crops thing that they've discussed, right?
Discussed. Exactly. They've discussed it ad nauseum.
It will continue to be discussed ad nauseum. I mean, here's the thing, right?
The discussions will go on, whether they actually build anything or support actually private peer-to-peer decentralized protocols, or they continue to rely on two corporations to build all of the blocks on Ethereum and completely ignore the two protocols originally defined in the Ethereum white paper. But they will absolutely continue to discuss crops, which P occupies the fourth index of that word. So privacy is not first important or second most important or third most important. It's the fourth most important thing to talk about as far as the Ethereum Foundation goes, which of course the director of which is Aya Miyaguchi, who still calls herself La Presidente, which is incorrect Spanish in her profile, and her pinned tweet is a swastika. Go check it out. Aya Miyaguchi, director of the Ethereum Foundation. Sorry, I digress.
No, you're good. I just think that the incentives in that community are such that even if people are legitimately focused on like a cypherpunk mentality, the incentives are such that it's going to be impossible to move the dial toward more privacy, more cypherpunk mentality, and not also and they have a worse problem than incentives. Frankly, there's so much technical debt, right? That bringing Ethereum into the privacy centric future is going to be virtually impossible, right? On a lot of domains. Okay, with that said, Logos very clearly. So one of the things that the founders and a lot of the key technical team and most of us in the Logos ecosystem, I think, is very important is really truly thinking about the technology stack as a public good that must possess certain features to defend privacy, to defend decentralization, to defend even private data storage, metadata privacy, the whole nine yards. So the idea here, and this is critical, guys, the notion of principally centric design, I think, sits at the heart of a lot of the way that Logos engineers think about the tech and just Logos community in general. I feel like this is part of the culture, and it's really, really important. This plays back into what we were talking about with regard to the network state, quote unquote, idea. And these so this is an issue, right? If a person has an incentive toward wanting to wanting to gain more power, and maybe they have a commercial incentive to make money, to meet a bottom line, or to assuage some kind of profit driven goal, then very naturally it's easier for those communities to basically forfeit any type of goal toward creating a product or a service that has these values in place, right? You can't really be principally centric in your design motive if you're trying to meet some kind of profit demand or you're trying to reach some kind of power center. So really, ultimately, it's about rethinking incentives, I think, on a fundamental level. And this comes from building a culture that cares about these values. It comes from educating people in the public about the importance of these values. And this is something, this is the props to Logo. This is something that Logos community has taken very seriously. So I just wanted to make that statement very clear. And I think this is ultimately too what you're getting at as well, Chair, and why it's all, why also I see the passion. You have so much passion and I guess also sadness about what happened to the Ethereum. Because I know you came into this via the Ethereum community, if memory serves, right?
Yeah, it was through that lens, like, and I stayed sort of, I don't know, I'm fiercely loyal, and like, and protect my friends and positions, fiercely, and sometimes over, oh, well over and beyond what is required or necessary or even tactful or wise or advised. Yeah, I'll go beyond all of that, and I'll use too many words as I do it, as I am right now. So, but I have become a sort of a disillusioned Ethereum maxi, in that, as all, however many Ethereum competitors came out since 2016 or so. And there's too many to name. Ethereum killers. This is the one that does Ethereum better and cheaper and faster. And oh no, this is the one. And they all came left. So it's like I sort of lean on that energy. And I think about, or I recalled that energy which I joined, and how fiercely I defended and sort of continued using Ethereum, even to my own detriment, maybe, probably. Think about like $400 transaction fees in the height of DeFi summer and the
Yeesh.
gas wars and all of that, right? Like, so, it's like a hard, like when you finally, for one reason or not, it's funny, like 2020 was such a pivotal year for so many reasons, but these big decisions that were made, like it's hard to, you make a decision as a person, as a group, whatever, you don't know ultimately what the repercussions or consequences will be until years later. Like it's pretty safe to say now, 6 years down the line, we understand that Ethereum no longer possesses the potential that it once had within its first definition. And yes, and I'm not qualified technically to speak on this, but I'm going to. Yes, it's difficult. It's building like truly private, truly cryptographically secure tech that's also fast and usable is a difficult thing to do. It requires a lot of resources, a lot of time, and a lot of coordination. For one reason or another, the Ethereum Foundation and the core devs were not up to the task. I can't imagine it was from lack of funding, though, you know? With the amount of Ethereum or Ether that the Ethereum Foundation is willing to sell, and proudly announce immediately after the fact that it dumped even more Ethereum on its holders and supporters, when it could stake that Ethereum for a very predictable return year over year, never having to actually spend the Ethereum that the Ethereum Foundation possesses. But that would be too straightforward, wouldn't it? So no, instead they market sell and then announce it in a tweet immediately afterwards, and pretend like that's just well, it is the status quo. That's how business is done because people have allowed them to do so. So the potential was lost. And what does that mean? Like, well, yeah, I'm sure that the financial institutions and regulators are thrilled that Ethereum will never be as private, as secure, as censorship resistant, as permissionless as it
Yeah.
was originally defined, because big banks don't like those
Million
words,
percent.
So if you wonder where those influences might come from, like,
Yeah, I think this is by the way, a few comments on this. This is probably a topic we could spend another whole session jamming over, because this speaks to the incentive problem, right? If any of these platforms, especially any or protocols, any of them that have grown in any kind of popularity and have really a bolstered network effect, the need to cater to traditional institutions, to governments, etc., has overridden any sense of being principally centric in their design ethos, right? Which is a real shame, because they don't have to cater to these institutions. You have a protocol that you can literally take any direction that you want, and you're not an easy target. So it's a real shame. This is speaking very specifically as an example of this. There's been a lot of people trying to get Bitcoin to actually be private, but they've been very public now, and I think a lot of this is propaganda about keeping Bitcoin transparent and not going private. And people saying that this is what makes it, this is why this is they're saying it's a good thing to be completely transparent, because it gives them more market
weird.
value. Win number go up is more valuable, right? But yet it's also a massive surveillance apparatus now. And a lot of people have gotten arrested and went to jail. Some of them not so bad of people, right? So it's a real shame.
Some more deserving than others, yes.
Yeah, true. I want to, before we start, I know we're going to be wrapping it up fairly soon. I wanted to bring it around back to our original topic as well. You mentioned, and I think this is something worth pondering. You're right that this technocratic kind of agenda, and this, by the way, this does play into our discussions of Ethereum too, because when something gets commercialized and it gets financialized, largely you're playing into a technocratic agenda, right? So I wanted to tie those points together, but I do think that, largely speaking, we're going to really have to work hard to keep our tools and technologies honest, especially as we're developing parallel societies, because we're seeing right now, this is the battle I think we're fighting in parallel societies. We're trying to keep these as honest as possible. We're trying to push the agenda, the cypherpunk crypto-anarchist agenda, forward within the context of these communities, but we're up against forces that want to keep the incentives really misaligned with our values. This idea too goes back, if we're going to get philosophical a bit, you mentioned Elon Musk's grandfather being the technocratic influence. If we're being real, there's always been this impulse to have some kind of king or ruler or authority, specifically with specialized knowledge, right? This is one of the things that Plato wrote about extensively, this notion that there should be a philosopher king, which is a king with specialized knowledge, right? Think of it as an Ivy League king, right? A king that comes from some secret organization in the context of Harvard or some Ivy League university, right? Does that ring a bell? And it's these kind of specialists who are trying to get a position in society where they can rule over the rest, because they think they have the domain knowledge and the domain wisdom to control everyone else. But I think we're learning very quickly, and we have learned, that there are ways that society can be organized and coordinated around a decentralized ethos, around decentralized frameworks. And I think it's more experimentation in this domain that's going to unleash completely novel governance mechanisms for our species. So I think we're headed in a good direction. But the overarching wisdom of this particular conversation that we were having, my friend, is simply that people should not be fooled by, and the good news is I think a lot of people are already skeptical anyway of people, of crypto bros, etc., tech bros, but definitely be skeptical of a parallel society movement that has all these promises of wanting to be attached to the big boys table, and that is wanting to create like a change in the context of the current system. I think that's the key red flag. Whereas those who are moving a bit more slowly but want to include humanitarian values, also want to include local communities. This is the other thing, and I'll mention this before we start winding it down because we didn't mention it earlier. A lot of these more technocratically flavored network states don't seem to really care about the local communities that they impinge upon, right? Like just say being network school in Malaysia, there's a sense, is there a sense there that the Malaysian people, even though it's on a synthetic island, are the Malaysian people taken into account about what they want and what their needs are? From my personal experience, I didn't see any interest or care or concern about that whatsoever, right? Because when these communities open up in a physical territory, they're not just going into a space tabula rasa, right? It's not a blank slate. Instead, there's people and communities already there. And I think one of the things that those of us in this regenerative sort of cypherpunk reality, we understand that when we go into spaces and communities that we're working from the bottom up, right? This is just like Logo Circles. We were just on the Logo Circles space. Logo Circles is working with the community as like a listening layer to figure out what the community wants so the community can solve their problems. And we're there more as a helping hand, right? More as a resource. That's a way to put it, as a resource to extend a hand of help to these communities. So I wanted to leave that little tidbit there.
And acting locally is it's the application that is the true like litmus test, maybe that's the right word for it, of like, do these technologies work? Like if you can't coordinate locally using Ethereum, well then it's not the right tool for for it. Like, but it's designed to be. That's the whole point. But if it's lack of privacy, its ability to censor, its ability to trace every movement that you take, for better or worse, directly back to you, like if those become a blocker for you solving an actual problem that your community or you or your family faces locally, then it's not living up to what it was designed to be, in the unstoppable environment for applications. And that's what originally inspired me, and that's what continues to inspire me. And I'm very grateful that something still exists that aspires to be that tool or that foundation, that ecosystem that supports that type of local action. And of course, I'm referring to Logos. Sterlin, I always have a lot of fun on the Crypto, Bitcoin, Ethereum Private Decentralized Infrastructure Show. We go every Tuesday at the same time, right here, wherever you are watching, which is across many different channels, across many different, very centralized applications and places. And we are very aware of that. A quick list of apologies. My apologies to communities coordinating via encrypted tech. Apologies to people competing with corporations and nation states. My apologies to anarchists. Apologies to network states. Singapore, the founder of Singapore. Apologies to the Chinese. Apologies to Curtis Yarvin, his parents and his brother. Apologies to Elon Musk and his great-grandfather. And thank you, the audience, for being here, following, subscribing, and turning notifications on. Go to logos.co. We plan to talk a lot about the Logos, the Logos native application Basecamp, we didn't mention it up until now. Perhaps we'll talk about it more, but we'll definitely talk about it more next week. But right now, if you go to logos.co, you can find and download the Basecamp application and start using it, because all of those features that I so eloquently or not spoke about throughout this stream are available on Logos Basecamp for you, the user, to use now. Things are in testnet. They're moving rapidly, so it behooves you to stay plugged in to that.
Oh, yeah.
Logos 2.
Sorry to interrupt your very nice informational segment there, Chair. I just want to let you guys know too, if you're whatever platform that you're on, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Chair and I put a lot of work into making this stream happen, and we put our time and energy into it, and we want to bring you as much value as possible. So make sure you guys sign up and follow us. Also follow Logos, of course, as well.
Well, Sterlin, I think we did it, and I think we're going to get out on time. How about them apples? All right, folks. This has been the Crypto, Bitcoin, Ethereum Private Decentralized Infrastructure Show. Follow at Sterlin Lujan. Follow at Very Comfy, as you see so beautifully scrolling across the bottom of your screen. We'll see you next week at this same time. Take care of each other. Take care of yourselves.